Greetings and salutations, everybody. This is Justin Grainert.
Matthew Neville.
With the Politics Aside podcast. We are the top-rated political interview and commentary show on the now award-winning Evansville Podcast Network. Jason, we're gonna loop you in here for a second. Congratulations, my man.
Congratulations, man.
Thank you. Congratulations to you guys, too.
Celebration of Leadership, Business, or Organization Award in Government and Public Service.
I'm pretty sure we're in the government part.
I'm pretty sure. I hope when you sent the application in, or whoever nominated you left the Politics Aside podcast off.
Totally not.
Okay, because like I said, we probably would have. Yeah, we probably would have tanked your your prestigious award. But as part of the network, I'm holding the trophy around, waving it around. That's great. Well, congratulations. You do a heck of a job, and all of the platforms are very cool. I listen to them all. And it's just an honor and a privilege to get a small piece of your time and energy, and to let Matt and I blow off steam on politics and everything else.
We need a place to blow off that steam. We have to have some kind of outlet.
Yeah. Right. And I'm going to try not to use Twitter to do it. If we've learned anything from the president, don't use Twitter. Well, we are back. We have a special episode today. We have a guest with us here shortly. Brad Byrd, local lead anchor for Local 7 and 25 WEHT.
I think it's fair to say he's the dean of Evansville journalists.
I would say that is absolutely true. He is one of the great guys in journalism. Gives us, we had a great conversation that you're going to hear shortly. We hope you like it. But we didn't want to completely leave our listeners without me saying something in the hopeful spirit that Donald Trump's going to become a normal president.
Just completely doing the opposite
and
thing.
Then literally no sooner do we shut off the microphones that Donald Trump contradicts me on this podcast. I will keep my streak alive, I'm sure. Where are we?
Lots happened.
I know.
I mean,
I'm going to let you have the floor.
At some point, I feel like we're going to have a period between podcasts where there doesn't seem like there's about 95 different things that we could entirely be talking about.
It's true. Now, I will say this, though. The irony of all ironies. Today, in the state of Indiana, Donald Trump is not on the top of the list, everybody. Indiana needs a new basketball coach.
We do.
So at least there is that. Tom Crean, thanks for your service to Indiana basketball.
Spent 9 years. He came to a program that was really not doing that well. He came into a program that was really really struggling.
Right.
I mean,
he rebuilt the program.
Absolutely.
And you know, I'm not 100% sure he should be gone, but thank you for putting Indiana back on the map, and hopefully the next guy up can take it to the next level, and we can hang another banner.
I've heard some rumors that Justin Grainert is on that list.
Nope.
I don't know if you can confirm or deny.
I am not on that
rumor
list
that I heard.
And don't start spreading that rumor. Don't.
I'll put it on Twitter. People think it's real.
As much as speaking of fake news, which we will get to in a little bit. So we've got a lot going on in the world. Ben Carson is the HUD secretary. John Huntsman is the ambassador to Russia.
See, I was surprised actually to see John Huntsman named the ambassador to Russia, because it seems like that half of the administration's an ambassador to Russia. I wasn't aware that we needed like an official ambassador, since there seemed to be a plentiful of them.
And it starts early and often. Well, I mean, they did get rid of Michael Flynn, who was a foreign agent. Apparently.
Literally, he just filed it as a foreign agent.
Yes. So I mean, they have to do something, right? They have to do something.
John Huntsman, not a bad choice, though. I mean, Huntsman I remember watching him. I think he ran for president in 2012.
Yes, he ran the primary in 2012.
He's fairly conservative, but he's
President Obama's ambassador to China.
Yes.
China. Ambassador to China. You've got to be pretty good and to have some gumption to sway Donald Trump into hiring you if you worked in the Obama
That's a heck of a resume. Ambassador to China and now ambassador to Russia. That is a world player right there.
As far back as they are scouring social media on some of these hires and who will or will not be hired based on who said what, yesterday Donald Trump was in Detroit and made a snide comment to the governor of Michigan, who he let into a photo, but noted publicly and loudly in front of cameras, "You didn't endorse me, but that's okay. I didn't forget. It's a thing. Check it out on social media.
I had legitimately not heard that story.
It happened, and Governor Schneider, to his credit, laughed it off and played along. But that happened. So
hashtag presidential.
Oh, the level to which we could hashtag presidential. I'm not sure if we're watching a bad episode of Veep yet or not. Sometimes. Between Kellyanne Conway and her microwavable spying apparatus and... I'm pretty convinced at this point they're just angling to see how many people can wear tinfoil hats in their houses. How many can we get to actually do it? Because I'm pretty sure, unless there's just some weird stuff I don't know about, I feel fairly safe that my microwave is not spying on me.
I mean, just remember, dance like your microwave's not watching you.
There you go. You
mentioned Ben Carson. What was your take on? There were some people in the whole Ben Carson comments that, for those of you who don't know, he made the comments. He gave a speech where he essentially made this comparison that slaves were immigrants and that they came over to work harder for less. And there were some that kind of took offense to that. There were some that kind of jumped up and down on him. There's some that pointed out that Obama had said somewhat similar things.
Look, again, it goes back to perception. Is what he said the smartest thing to say in the world? No, it wasn't. If you took him out of the Trump apparatus and he makes that point, is it as offensive? It's probably not in good taste, but it's not horrifically offensive.
It would have gotten near in the coverage that it did if it hasn't been a cabinet administrator.
And I in no way agree with the idea that he was pushing. I think that that's a much different scenario than someone trying to come to the United States to better their lives. When you're taken sort of against your will, I think that sort of elevates things slightly to a different level. But at the end of the day, it got the coverage that it got because it plays into the larger narrative that the Trump administration and some of his supporters have perpetuated. And again, I think anytime you get something like this that's even borderline, they're not going to get the benefit of the doubt, nor do I think they should. It
was certainly an interesting take on history. I wonder if he also thinks that Harriet Tubman ran a very successful travel agency.
And there it is, everybody.
That's a good joke. I don't know why you're giving me that look. That's a good joke right there.
You realize we have to lead into an interview with an esteemed journalist, and you give me that as the lead-in.
That's a good joke.
Wow. Okay. Well, I thought we were going to go longer, but I'm going to end this portion of the show on that. Next up, you will hear a previously recorded interview with Brad Byrd. Again, Brad has been a stable voice and face for this community. Has some interesting takes on the evolution of social media, and I think he used the word media in air quotes on that.
A couple times, I think he did.
Yeah, and sort of his take on the state of journalism in the world of Donald Trump. We're excited. I think it's a great little interview, and we appreciate Brad for coming in. And again, Jason, congratulations.
Congratulations, man.
I think it's a great honor what you've done with the podcast originally and have spawned it into us. There are some people that should question a lot of things about you, but we certainly appreciate it. It's an honor to work with you, and I think we can roll the tape. Matt, do you got anything else before we lead into this interview?
I think you guys will enjoy the interview with Brad. Touched on a couple of things, talk a little bit of local, a little bit of national, a little bit of what's going on now, but I think you guys will enjoy it.
Awesome. Well, we're going to go live to Brad Byrd.
Guys, enjoy.
Thanks. Today we have a very special guest, Brad Byrd, voice of my childhood. I hate to date you a little bit. But Brad is one of the staple voices and faces now in television media in Evansville. We are going to have an interesting conversation today about sort of the state of journalism in the world of Donald Trump. So Brad has said that he is going to stir the pot heavily. We are going to get massive amounts of views. Hopefully Donald Trump tweets us back and tells us that we are all bad, sad, and horrible. So just to start, give us a background, kind of how you got into journalism and why you stayed in Evansville.
Well, I'll try to keep this. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version.
Okay, perfect.
And thank you very much for the invitation today. I'm very, very happy to be here. I grew up in my formative years as a teenager during the 1960s, and what a decade for a young person to grow up in. John F. Kennedy, the Cuban Missile Crisis, civil rights, the Detroit riots, the assassinations of JFK, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Robert F. Kennedy, all within about a 5-year span, and of course, Vietnam. I got hooked on journalism at that point because I vividly remember watching the Chicago Convention, the Democratic Convention in 1968. I believe two major events in that decade basically put television on the radar as far as a necessity, almost a mandate to step forward. And that obviously was the assassination of John F. Kennedy and, of course, the Chicago riots in 1968, how the democratic process was really being tested and how journalists were being tested in that era. Was very interested in that. Graduated from high school up in Muncie Central High in 1970, and I entered Ball State University and got my degree in mass communications and journalism in 1974. I was very lucky because I was able to, much to one of my professors' chagrins, I actually got to work at several stations while I was doing my studies. And sometimes, I'll be frank, there's a plaque up at Ball State that David Letterman was honored with, dedicated to all C students. That's in the building that is named after him.
Let me tell you, this podcast is full of them. So you
Absolutely.
are in good company, Brad.
But
except for Jason. Jason had to have been an A+ student. Let's be real. Matt and I are the GPA drains on this podcast, certainly.
But I worked at various stations, radio and television, while I was in school. I came to Evansville directly after working part-time as a weekend anchor in Fort Wayne, Channel 15 up there. I was only 23 years old, and I came down here to work as the weekend anchor at WFIE, Channel 14. Worked full-time there. That was my first full-time job. I was the nightside reporter during the week, anchored weekends. Very green, learned a lot, and I was a stranger to Evansville. So I was in a processing mode, and as I said, extremely inexperienced at that time. Made a lot of mistakes, learned from my mistakes, hopefully. And then I was hired as the evening lead anchor at WEHT Channel 25 in January of 1978. So I'm now in my 40th year at 25, and of course, Channel 25 and Channel 7, WTVW, merged a little more than 5 years ago. So I'm broadcasting on two stations now. So, but why did I stay in Evansville? It's a great news town, a great community to raise a family in. But I've been given opportunities to do things here, especially during the Channel 25 era, that I would be able to do if I worked in a much, much bigger market. I've covered 2 presidential inaugurations. I was able to produce and front a documentary in Poland, in Eastern Europe, about 2 local Peace Corps workers in Krakow about 22 years ago. Got to cover Don Mattingly in Yankee Stadium because our sports crew was out of town.
That's fantastic.
When he won the batting crown.
That's great.
And I've been able to do things that I would be able to possibly do maybe if I was in a larger market, but I was very, very fortunate. I worked with have worked and continue to work with some great people. And it's very rewarding because it's a great story here in this community, the good and the bad.
Right.
So.
And and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I feel like as a community, we're incredibly blessed. When I was growing up, it was Brad Byrd, it was Randy Moore, it was Mike Blake, it was Ann Comas, it was David James. All of them are still sort of around and still involved. I mean, Ann and David have since retired, but you still see them around. And Randy Moore looks like he did 30 years ago. It's insane. You got a little more gray, but you look pretty normal. And the way I remember you as a little kid too. So I think we are incredibly blessed to have sort of the stability that we've had in the news media. And I think that has helped. But talk a little bit about sort of the changing landscape and how we've lost some of that, and if you think that's a detriment or not, or is it something that I'm just making up?
I think it's a hybrid because we have so many platforms now in this digital age we live. We have social media, and I still don't know why they call it social media. It was originally known as the social network. They even named a movie after the Zuckerberg biopic. And I think that we have the technology to do some wonderful things, but at the same time, one word that I am very troubled about is the word multitask. And I understand it, and I know we must deal with all of the platforms that are before us, but I still feel that it tends to, it's basically telling our viewers or anyone who's on their smartphones, oh yes, I can multitask. But it's kind of telling people, I'm not paying attention to the task at hand. And the good is many positive things can come from social media. It can bring down regimes. It can help save lives. But I've seen some of the detriment, and that is I think I've seen too many mistakes that have been made everywhere. We've made them. Competition's made them. The networks have made them. And I think that is the pressure that we are trying to do more with less as far as human resources are concerned.
I think it's part of that pressure as well, kind of, everybody wants to be the first to break something, the first to get out there and to say, we knew this first, and especially in the age of social media where, I get a lot of my news from Twitter first, and then I'll get a notification on my phone second. So there's that kind of urge to, I want to be the first person to get that news out there. I think that can lend to some of the mistakes. That's something you think.
And that's a very good point, but I often quote Peter Jennings, I'd rather be second and right instead of first and wrong.
Right.
Let me give you an example. The horrific tragedy of Sandy Hook, the elementary school shooting. All those kids and the teachers who we lost in that atrocity. A major network put on Twitter a picture of a man and identified that man as the suspect. Well, Adam Lanza was the man who was the shooter. And that was on Twitter for, I believe, about 45 minutes, maybe an hour. That is an eternity. That is infinity from social media terms. If it had been on for 2 minutes, the damage was done. There was only one problem with that picture. It was Adam Lanza's brother, the picture. And he was in New York City at the time. So that is often now that is a dramatic example of what can happen to just rush. Got to get that on, got to get it on right now. But I'm a firm believer that if the competition beats me on one night on a story because they got something first, the sun also rises, to quote Hemingway, and everything's going to be okay. And especially in this day and age where fake news, which is now one of the topics that I know we're talking about, is in the vocabulary, and that has been around for some time. It's just only been way up on the flagpole in recent months. We have to be careful. It's not rocket science. Basically, tell the truth, be honest, ask the questions that people want answered, and get it right. It's as simple as that. It's a bona fide canon of journalism. And sometimes I think maybe we're trying to make it too complicated, but that's essentially what our responsibility is.
I even remember even more recently, when these shootings in Dallas with the police officers, I remember I stayed up till 3 or 4 in the morning watching the live news results of that. I remember there was about an hour time frame where where the Dallas Police Department had put out this photo of a guy that was a person of interest who had been carrying a weapon during the event. And everybody started looking for him. And you can create kind of a real dangerous situation, especially when that guy ended up being somebody that, when the shooting started, went to a police officer and said, "It's unloaded. Here, take this."
Yeah,
right.
I think especially with social media, I remember the Dallas Police Department tweeted that picture out, and it got thousands upon thousands of retweets, and the news media picked it up on it, and was, that's one of the things that can really happen.
Right. Well, the involvement of the evolution of fake news, it really started many years ago. And just recently, and I triple-checked, I saw this on Google, so I triple-checked this to make sure.
3 sources, right?
A story about fake news is not fake news, but it was a moneymaker. And what was frightening was 2 authors of fake news were at the, I believe it was the South by Southwest conference, and this was posted about almost a day ago. And they were basically very forward about how they did it, basically twisting facts. It used to be called disinformation. I used to call it mistakes, incorrect, but we call it fake news. But what they did, they even manufactured fake comments to fake stories, and that got, you talk about stirring the pot, got it going. With that being said, I think I give people credit. I think they're smarter than sometimes we think they are. I think the everyday citizen, common sense, will look at things and say, well, now wait a minute. And I think we all know now, especially with this problem that has really been forefront in the last several weeks, few months, to just basically don't channel all of your information into one source. Shop around, look around for it. And I think the internet and probably the way we design websites now, it's kind of contributed to what I call a narrow point of view, because we can customize those websites. We can like the Facebook pages that we want to like. I guess in the old days when you read the newspaper, if you were really just wanting to check the sports scores, you had to kind of look at the front page of the paper before you went to the sports section. So,
well, and one of the things, I was at a dinner in Indianapolis this week, and Ann Compton, who I'm sure you know, former ABC News colleague, talked about sort of the idea of fake news versus inaccurate news, and how they're different, but they play into each other.
Yes,
and it goes back into sort of the mainstream media's rush to get things first, as opposed to getting them right, and then that plays into the narrative that there is fake news out there that you've said, and there are people that disseminate it on purpose, and how that can undercut the mainstream media's role. Because the mistakes over here get tied into, well, it's just fake news. See, everyone's on the take, or at least that's sort of the narrative.
They get lumped together.
That's the narrative that the Trump administration seems to be wanting to push somewhat. And you can touch that lightning rod if you want to.
Well, sometimes we get painted with the same brushstroke sometimes, but I think fake news kind of evolved. If you look way back to fake news is where someone is deliberately publishing or posting a falsehood that they know to be untrue. An inaccurate report is a situation where it may be the rush or the misunderstanding, well, I took something off the record that I shouldn't have, or I got my notes wrong, that type of situation. That to me is an inaccurate reporting.
Yes, and that
I don't think there is motive or intent in that. It's very serious, and we're accountable. But I think a lot of the fake news evolved from satire. And I believe that, well, let's just take, for example, Mr. Trump, SNL. They're funny. I can see where you have to have a thick skin. I mean, that's part of the act, but it tends to go into it. Some of that has become, I'm not saying it's SNL, I'm just saying that in the past, I think this one author said he had lost a good friend who used to be into satire. And so he just started putting these posts up just to vent or whatever. Could be construed as the real deal, and it wasn't. So satire, I think sometimes, which has been around forever and will continue to be around.
Sure.
It's a free country. It's a free marketplace. It's free speech. And it can be quite funny and quite entertaining.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
But the fake news aspect of it, that can be dangerous.
Well, and to your point on SNL, it has a long history of sort of linking sort of fake sort of satire into reality. I mean, you look at Gerald Ford. The guy was an All-American athlete at the University of Michigan.
The guy turned into a guy that couldn't climb stairs.
Yeah, Chevy Chase does the impression.
That made Chevy Chase a star, basically.
You look at Sarah Palin. I can see Russia from my back porch. Tina Fey said that.
Right.
George W. Bush never used the word strategery. And it's all been, so to your point, you're right. That does sort of get into the mainstream lexicon and becomes reality, whether you like it or not.
Well,
sometimes.
think about it. There was a Washington Post columnist, and forgive me, I cannot remember his name, but I did read this column, and the headline was, "Please don't tell me I am the media."
Right.
I'm a journalist, and I know where he's coming from on that, because what is the media? I mean, we can look it up in the dictionary, but I still look at myself as a journalist. Do I make mistakes? Of course I do. But if knowingly, and I think I can speak for the other people in the market who are in journalism, if I find out that I've broadcast on air a mistake, I want to get the correction on not tomorrow, immediately. The damage is already done. And I think that this overall, as I mentioned before, this brushstroke, how we're all painted, it can be, it's stereotypical, but that's part of society.
Sure. Well, I mean, they did let two guys like us have a podcast, so we probably aren't helping your argument very much. But we try to have more fun with it. We don't take ourselves too seriously here at Politics Society.
Well, and two journalists, and as you well know, unlike lawyers, we don't have to pass a bar exam. Unlike doctors, we don't have to go to medical school and be certified to practice in a certain discipline. If we want to be commercial truck drivers, you have to get a commercial license. But we don't have a license, and I've often said my license is my conscience, and I think there are fellow journalists who feel that way, and it really it comes from the heart. And up here, that we've got to be held accountable. How are we held accountable? Well, if we get something wrong that might libel someone, we're going to be held accountable very, very quickly. And that's happened everywhere. So we have a tremendous responsibility, because the weight of what we do, our words, even if I hold my eyebrow a certain way on a story, some people can read that as a smug bias, and that is the last thing that I want to do.
Sure. Let's shift gears a little bit into the election of 2016. You gave a talk at the Rotary Club shortly after Election Day, and it was a fascinating discussion. Everybody in this room, I can certainly tell you, was convinced Hillary Clinton was going to be president. And I'm pretty sure 95% of journalists were reporting that Hillary Clinton was going to be president. Everything pointed that way. What happened?
Well, I can tell you what happened. Basically, as I said to the Rotary Club downtown, the media, when I say, there I said it.
Got him.
Got me. Mainstream journalists, in most cases, got it wrong. And here's how it happened, because the night, I was very lucky. I had University of Evansville President Dr. Thomas Kazee and University of Southern Indiana Professor Dr. Matt Hanke as our political analysts at the in-depth table. And I would say about 9:30 on the night of the election, they were just, I was over at the main anchor desk, I was getting ready to talk to them, and they were just like going back and forth on screens, and they had kind of a quizzical look, and this was, I think, between 9 and 9:30. And I walked over and said, anything I should know? He said, Hillary's in trouble. And I said, excuse me? And Hillary,
I think everybody said, excuse me.
Hillary is in trouble. And Dr. Kazee and Dr. Hanke explained it very succinctly, and they were right. The polling data was there for almost a week. It was there for almost a week, and it was basically there was weaknesses being shown right in our neck of the woods, the Rust Belt here in the midsection of the country. And even though Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, it all comes down to that electoral count. And they were starting to do, and the networks, you could tell it was almost like a tsunami that was, you could see it way on the horizon. What is that? And it was coming in. And when I went home after our coverage, the local coverage, I think I went home at midnight and I stayed up until about 4 a.m. But you could tell, I had the remote in my hand. I was going from ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox. Particularly, I noticed CNN and ABC. I could tell the people that they had on, they were just doing what we're doing right now. You could tell they were off script. And as it turned out, Hillary Clinton did not show up that night underneath the glass ceiling in that tower in New York. But you could tell that it was right there. I guess it was hiding in plain sight and had been for a while. We didn't pick up on it, and we should have. I think everyone learned a lesson. Just polling is something when we talk about the margin of error, that's both ways.
Yeah.
That can be like 4 points. That can be 4 points this way with Donald Trump, and maybe 4 points the other way for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
So it was much, much closer than, and that gets us to the tweets and to the headlines. We've become a headline reading company. I can tell when I post something on my professional page, my Facebook page. I can tell, and if I've got maybe a 3-paragraph insight, I can tell by the comments that I see sometimes that someone has not read the entire post. I mean, it's right there in black and white. So I encourage students that I talk to, everyone, go deeper into what they're saying here. Sometimes the lead gets buried. It shouldn't be, but
right.
it gets buried.
Don't bury the lead, guys. Don't do it.
So, but it was an incredible night. It seemed surreal, and
we're 3 months into the Trump administration, and it still seems surreal.
Oh yeah,
it's still from our perspective. I think
it was the strangest thing to be watching the presidential address and to hear them announce the president of the United States and to see Donald Trump walking in. It's still a very surreal thing to be able to see.
I will tell you, if you've listened to the podcast at all, we've struggled with that a little bit, and yeah, it's been an interesting time, certainly. What does this compare to? Everybody says history repeats itself, and you've been around for a while, and we've seen, we're into day 50-something of the Trump administration, and you get a somewhat of a read on kind of how things have gone and look to be going. What would you compare this to?
Well, the 1968 presidential race was probably the most chaotic that I had ever witnessed in my lifetime. But as far as, and in all due respect to President Trump, I mean, the man has the right to state his opinion, and he used social media and he still is using social media. Witness what happened with Rachel Maddow just a day ago or so. But I haven't really seen anything quite like this where, well, first of all, the attacks on the media, that I have seen. Spiro Agnew gave that primetime network live speech, and his target was primarily the 3 networks at that time. And I believe that speech was in 1970. And it was as I recall, I watched that. They cut into programming, and they wouldn't do that now if Mike Pence was giving a speech. But as I recall, I believe the Nixon administration said, you may want to cover this. And what this was it turned out to be the Nixon administration's attack on the press. Mm-hmm. And Agnew cited several instances. I remember vividly one was he said during the Chicago riots, the networks were repeating shots from different angles, and in his opinion, making it seem like the riot was bigger than it was. Today, that's called, I think, looping, where you'll see the same thing over with it. We don't loop something unless we really want someone to take a second look and so forth. That I remember, somewhat like that, where a public official who had been elected early in the term was attacking the media. But everything has changed, especially with social media. Everything has changed, and appointment viewing is no longer. Hey, right after dinner, let's watch Walter Cronkite. We don't wait. We've got to have it on our phone. We check our apps, and we start reacting, some of us, immediately. And that's where the storm of information goes. I will say that as far as in fiction, there have been things similar to this. I remember the movie Network. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that.
Yep. Yeah.
How prophetic was Paddy Chayefsky in that as far as where my profession was heading. I saw that in a theater here in Evansville in 1977. I was in my early 20s. I thought, well, that'll never happen.
Famous last words, right?
Yeah. So But as far as what we're seeing right now, this is new ground. But I'll say this: I watched Tom Brokaw, and I believe of all places he was on Jimmy Fallon, and he asked him about this, and Tom Brokaw said his advice to journalists is stay calm, be respectful, but stay the course. And I'm paraphrasing him here, and ask the questions. And continue to seek the truth. Bringing up Watergate 40 years ago, I read All the President's Men for the third time last year. This is before the election. The Washington Post was in the doghouse with a lot of people. It was really the only paper, that and the New York Times to an extent, but it was Woodward and Bernstein who really, really stayed focused before it became, wow, we've got something here. Possibly. And that kind of reminds me of you've got to stay the course, and whatever you do, don't make any mistakes in that.
Having watched some of how this has gone down, I mean, there are certain things that have sort of bubbled underneath. Obviously, the Russia stuff. What is real and what isn't. And it seems to me like every time we seem to be getting somewhere, Sean Spicer, has the worst job in Washington.
Absolutely.
And we've talked about that.
I legitimately feel bad for him.
He has an audience of one, whereas, the White House press secretary should have an audience of 350 million people. He's got an audience of one. He's got to keep one man happy. And, Kellyanne Conway, God bless her, comes out and says just crazy stuff that on its face is false, and she can't be serious in thinking that it's not.
I think they've reined her in somewhat.
They have.
And Sean Spicer was actually, if I'm not mistaken, but I believe he was handling two of the White House communications.
Press secretary and the communications director.
Right. But he is starting to. He said what did he say the other day? Don't make me move this podium.
Right, and
he's embraced the SNL. I think he's kind of getting a little more comfortable up there.
But I think, but my larger point here is this: every time it seems like there is something that needs to be looked at, somebody in that administration says something off the wall and crazy, and we spend the next 48 hours, the next 2 news cycles, trying to either figure out who died in the Bowling Green massacre or whatever the random thing is. And it seems like
what our microwaves are doing.
Right. And it seems to me that the media kind of chases the rabbit sometimes instead of staying the course, as you say.
It would be almost nice sometimes. I think people are tired. I honestly think people are. I've had people tell me, I'm just so tired of this. And not necessarily tired of President Trump or tired of Conway or Spicer or Paul Ryan or the Democrats coming down or what have you. They are just tired. It's almost like this is still a campaign almost. And the nation is divided. And it's almost like I sometimes think to myself, gee, maybe I ought to just put the cell phone down and just see what's on the news. It's 5:30 with World News Tonight or NBC Nightly News or the CBS Evening News, like the old days. And I will not open my phone app to the Courier and Press or the New York Times until tomorrow morning. just take a deep breath.
Right.
Of course, I'm not going to do that. But but I'll tell you, it's almost like a gee whiz. I wish I could.
Right.
Something. Where
Yeah,
I'm coming from.
absolutely.
Sometimes you have to we get excited in newsrooms, but we have to what I will tell young reporters, who told you that? Attribution. Confirmation. Attribution is so very critical. Was that on the record or was it off the record? I'll have a conversation with public officials, but I always tell them, is it fair for me to quote you on this? This is what I am going to say. Put the brakes on there. But it is you really have to have substance to what you are reporting. And I think that's what got Rachel Maddow in trouble the other night. I think it was very legitimate what she was doing, but that buildup, that marketing of it was, and then she went to commercial. This went on for about a half hour, and we realized it was, okay, that's interesting, see what he did. And I think it started sinking in when most people said, this is his 2005 tax return.
Right.
We want to see the 2015, 2016 tax return.
And that's kind of what they hinted, when they sent out the initial tweet. They left it very ambiguous of which tax return it was. They just said, we have Trump's tax returns. Tune in at 8:00. And
well, got your attention.
Yeah, it certainly caught my attention. So
I guarantee you her ratings were up the first 20 minutes of that episode.
Well,
certainly.
her ratings have gone up from what I've read, and this is not fake news. Her ratings have gone up since he was elected.
Sure. And it's like in 2005 where Keith Olbermann became the poster child for MSNBC, and that was the hottest news thing going. And then Fox News's, sort of triumphant return to number one during the Obama administration. So it seems like, you always kind of, the American people are certainly, we are 50-50 really. And whoever's outraged is the one that drives the ratings somewhat.
And the tragedy of this as a journalist, we shouldn't take sides.
Right.
We shouldn't even intimate. If we ask a tough question of a Republican, we should have the same tenacity to ask a tough question of a Democrat.
Sure.
Or a liberal or a conservative, ultra-right, ultra-left, legitimate, fair questions.
Sure.
That are absolutely, you are accountable. If you're elected, you're accountable. As a reporter and a journalist, I'm accountable. And I've got to take that responsibility. I do take that responsibility very seriously and not lightly.
Well, I know you've got, some places to be. Since you do have a newscast here this evening. Just one final thing. We've been going for about 25 minutes. And who should people be watching? Who, in your estimation, is sort of who should we be following? Who should we be watching? Who does it right?
Eyewitness News is on at 4, 5, 6,
yourself
9,
included and excluded, because we know.
I don't tell people to watch any one particular entity.
Sure.
Take it all in.
Sure.
And by doing that is, I don't think you can channel. We're no longer in the era of Uncle Walter and Huntley and Brinkley. I'm really dating myself there. And Peter Jennings, Ted Koppel. Those days are gone. So I encourage everyone. And that's where Facebook and Twitter especially Facebook, people who are who were pro-Hillary during the election, we all tend to migrate to sites that we're going to read what we want to see. Same thing with Mr. Trump. I would encourage everyone, take in as much, read history books. I'm constantly telling young people, get connected back to history. And I think today's generation is very intelligent, but I think there is a tremendous disconnect with history. This community that we are in, the World War II story in this community, everyone, I'm still learning stuff about the sacrifice. And that's not a celebration of war by any means, but what the people in this community, this very neighborhood, the shotgun-style houses north of downtown Evansville, why many of the homes on Washington Avenue were basically turned into multi-family dwellings. They were once single-family homes. It shaped our landscape. And I always tell, especially young journalists, invest in the community that you're covering. And by investing, I mean pick up a book, read about it. If you got to Google up. And I think one of the issues that I've seen, we did a special report. I went up to my alma mater, Ball State, and I went out to Harrison High School. I talked to Phil Bremen, a former NBC correspondent who is now a professor at Ball State. And I talked to Professor Emeritus Steve Bell. He covered Vietnam for ABC. He was the ABC Good Morning America anchor. Both pure-blood, old-school journalists. And I talked to a teacher at Harrison High School, and he spoke volumes. He said, the disconnect, and it was the 50th anniversary of JFK's assassination. We all know about the conspiracy theories. But this one teacher said, I call it the Google effect with today's generation. Why do I have to I don't really have to use my brain, looking up books and what have you. Say if I hear of something, if I'm interested in something, go to Google, look at all those entries. Okay, I got it. Now, am I going to retain that? Probably not. I do that sometimes. Do it a lot. It's like Google's almost, and I use Google. There are several search engines out there, but Google, when you know your product's being used as a verb, you've got a successful, like Kleenex, even if you're picking up puffs. But it's a situation where we've got these smartphones right at our fingertips, and okay, I've got that information. All right, time to move on. Chew it up, digest it, go on. And I think that is one of the reasons why, and I see it, very smart, intelligent young people. When Mary Tyler Moore passed away, there were more than a few staffers who had no idea who she was. And now, was she important? Absolutely. Absolutely. What she did for the image of women, especially in the 1970s, has a direct effect on lives today. And that's what I'm talking about, that disconnect that tends to trouble me. But I'm now sounding like the uncle who comes to the Christmas party that you wish would go home. So
okay, we're going to let you end it. How do you want to, what did we not ask you that you want to kind of impart to our listeners? All 7 of them. Just kidding. I think we're higher than that, aren't we? We're at 12 now? Hey. Awesome.
Well, you didn't ask me what my favorite color is, but
what is your favorite color? Okay, what's your favorite color?
Burgundy, and I like a purple. Yes, okay. Go right ahead.
Is there? You've interviewed a lot of people in the area. Is there someone that's like you haven't been able to talk to yet that you wish you could have talked to?
I've been very lucky, and I've learned to. I always try to put myself in the shoes of the people that I cover. I did have Steve Chancellor on In Depth live. That was about 3 to 4 weeks ago. And I saw during the inauguration, I don't know if you saw this, when the dignitaries were coming down the steps on the platform there. You've got several presidents, you've got vice presidents, and the president-to-be right smack dab in the middle of that. Right there, full screen was Steve Chancellor.
He actually had better seats than the vice president's brother. He was sitting in front of Vice President Pence's brother. It was unreal.
And the way I looked at that story, of course, he's had the major fundraisers, but I called and I talked to him for several minutes on the phone, and the way I treated that was, this is a story. This is a story. And I'm not talking about politics here. I'm just talking about, here's a story of someone being right there in the center of all that power. And he came out. We had a very, very good discussion on the air. Did I ask any gotcha questions? No, I didn't. I just basically wanted to establish a dialogue on what it was like. He's close friends to the Bushes, and he shared some good stories about that. And I thought it was a fascinating story. I got to interview Lily King on In Depth. She even she wagged her finger at me, and I was so honored. And so I've been very lucky. The people that I've talked to and have been able to carry on a conversation with in either reporting or live has been very wonderful. I think my fondest memory, my favorite story is still when photographer Mark Fisher and I were in Krakow, Poland, and this group of kids in Poland, this was shortly after the fall of communism, and they were converting to more of a capital society. The kids were playing baseball on a concrete lot, but they didn't have any equipment to speak of. A group, I believe, from Newburgh shipped over mitts, baseballs, bats, catchers, helmets, etc. And we were there. We were able to be there when they were able to open that equipment up, and just to see the expressions on those kids' faces, and talk to one young lady who spoke a little bit of English, and I thought to myself, I didn't speak a lick of Polish, so but I thought that was that was probably the most rewarding story I ever was lucky enough to cover.
That's great. Well, thank you for being with us.
Yes,
thank you so much.
Thank you,
Matt.
Great conversation.
Thank you, Justin.
We will be back next week. We have another guest, Michael Leppert, blogger, author. Check out his website, contrariana.com. He'll be with us to talk kind of the state of the state, if you will. We'll be talking about stuff at the State House, kind of his view of the world, and we'll give Matt a partner to beat me up
there
for
once. There we go. Need a fellow liberal to start jumping on
this
Justin
podcast. He's going to get a win most likely because Michael Leppert's way smarter than I am. But thank you for joining us this week. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be talking with you soon. Thanks again, guys.
Thanks, everybody.